Picture this: a dimly lit scriptorium deep within a medieval monastery, where a lone scribe bends over parchment by candlelight, carefully transcribing texts that could cost him his life if discovered. Outside, armored knights patrol shadowed corridors, guarding secrets far older than the castles they inhabit. This wasn't just the stuff of legend. It was the reality of the Dark Ages, a time when the clash between ink and iron didn't just shape empires, it birthed secret societies that operated in whispers and shadows. What if I told you that beneath the surface of what we call the Dark Ages lay a hidden world of clandestine alliances, where knowledge was so powerful it had to be encoded, and loyalty was sealed in blood? For centuries, we've been taught to think of this era as a stagnant void between the fall of Rome and the Renaissance, a time of backwardness and decay. But the truth is far more fascinating. Behind the scenes, networks of monks, knights, and scholars were weaving a web of secrecy, preserving forbidden ideas and guarding traditions that would outlast kingdoms. They understood something profound: that ink, whether in the form of cryptic manuscripts or symbolic codes, could be as mighty as the sword. And when those two forces combined, they created something extraordinary: societies so secretive, so influential, that their fingerprints are still visible in our world today. So why does this matter now? Because the legacy of these hidden networks isn't confined to history books. Their symbols echo in our architecture, their rituals inspire modern fraternities, and their mysteries fuel countless conspiracy theories. This is the story of how the written word and the blade became unlikely partners in the shadows, forging brotherhoods that defied kings and popes. It's a tale of courage, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge against all odds. And by the end of this journey, you'll never look at a medieval manuscript or a suit of armor the same way again, ready to uncover the secrets. Let's begin. The collapse of Rome didn't just topple an empire, it shattered the very idea of order, leaving behind a patchwork of crumbling roads, abandoned cities, and whispered fears. In this fractured world, where warlords and invaders carved up the land like a feast for the hungry, survival demanded more than strength. It required secrecy. Imagine a village elder hiding sacred texts beneath floorboards as raiders torch the church, or a knight swearing an oath in a candlelit crypt, knowing that speaking openly could mean death. This was the reality that birthed the first hidden orders. Monastic brotherhoods became the unlikely guardians of civilization itself. While kingdoms rose and fell, these scribes and scholars worked in silence, copying ancient manuscripts by hand, not just prayers but forbidden knowledge. A single book might contain Greek philosophy, herbal remedies, or star charts that challenged the church's teachings. To protect these treasures, they developed tricks straight out of a spy's handbook. Invisible ink made from lemon juice, messages woven into illuminated letters, even entire libraries hidden beneath monasteries. Their ink was a weapon, preserving ideas that could topple thrones. But it wasn't just monks who mastered the art of secrecy. Knightly orders like the legendary Templars took a different approach. They paired ink with iron. Picture a warrior monk etching strange symbols onto his sword, not for decoration, but as a code known only to his brothers. These men weren't just fighters. They were bankers, diplomats, and architects, running a shadow empire with encrypted ledgers and clandestine meetings. When a Templar handed you a coin stamped with a cryptic sigil, it wasn't just currency, it was a key to a network stretching from Jerusalem to London. The genius of these societies lay in their adaptability. In an age of chaos, they turned the very instability that threatened others into their armor. A plague emptying a town that meant fewer prying eyes, a king too busy fighting rebellions to notice. perfect for building hidden strongholds. Even their rituals, like initiation ceremonies held at midnight, weren't just pageantry. They were psychological armor, binding members tighter than any law. What made the Dark Ages uniquely fertile for secrecy was something deeper, though. Without a single authority to enforce rules, truth itself became fluid. A whispered rumor in one village could morph into sacred doctrine by the next. In that ambiguity, secret societies thrived, crafting their own narratives. They understood something timeless. When the world goes dark, light isn't just found, it's forged in hidden places. And the tools of that forging, a quill in one hand, a blade in the other. Behind the thick stone walls of monasteries, where the only sounds were the scratching of quills and the occasional cough of a weary scribe, an underground revolution was taking shape. These scriptoriums weren't just workshops, they were fortresses of forbidden knowledge, where monks risked everything to keep ancient wisdom alive. Picture a young novice straining his eyes by flickering candlelight, carefully copying Aristotle's lost works onto fresh vellum, knowing that if discovered, both the text and his life could go up in flames. What made these manuscripts so dangerous? Some challenged church doctrine with radical ideas like the notion that the earth revolved around the sun, or that diseases had natural causes rather than divine punishment. Others preserved pagan rituals, alchemical formulas, or mathematical treatises from Islamic scholars that Europe wasn't ready to accept. To safeguard them, monks developed ingenious methods. They'd hide controversial passages inside harmless-looking prayer books, using a technique called palimpsest, where they'd scrape off old text and write over it, leaving the original barely visible beneath. Some even crafted books within books, hollowing out thick Bible covers to stash smaller, riskier manuscripts inside. The scribes themselves became masters of deception. One famous example is the monk who disguised a treatise on astronomy as a commentary on the Book of Genesis, weaving revolutionary star charts into biblical imagery. Another smuggled Greek medical texts across Europe by binding them inside volumes of saints' lives. These weren't just acts of preservation, they were quiet acts of rebellion, proving that ideas could be smuggled past watchful eyes as effectively as any contraband. But why go to such lengths? Because these men understood something profound. Knowledge was power, and power threatened those who ruled. When Charlemagne ordered monasteries to standardize religious texts in the 8th century, it wasn't just about consistency, it was control. By controlling what was copied, authorities could shape what people believed. The monks who secretly preserved alternate versions weren't just archivists, they were guardians of intellectual diversity in an age of enforced conformity. The legacy of these scriptorium spies echoes today. Many Renaissance breakthroughs, from Copernicus' heliocentric model to Paracelsus' medical reforms, were built on texts these medieval scribes preserved at great personal risk. Their ink-stained fingers didn't just copy words, they kept alive the possibility of questioning, exploring, and imagining beyond the boundaries of their time. And in doing so, they laid the foundation for every secret society that followed, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a sword, but a well-hidden book. Among all the secret societies of the Dark Ages, none combined brute force and intellectual cunning quite like the Knights Templar. These weren't just warriors in white cloaks. They were a paradox, monks who could recite scripture by heart one moment and cut down enemies with chilling efficiency the next. Officially, their mission was simple: protect Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem. But behind that noble facade, they built something far more ambitious, a clandestine empire where ink-stained ledgers held as much power as their legendary swords. Take their banking system, for instance. While most knights measured wealth in land and loot, the Templars invented financial instruments that wouldn't look out of place today. A pilgrim could deposit gold at a Templar stronghold in Paris, receive an encrypted note, and redeem it for the same value in Jerusalem, essentially creating the first international traveler's check. Their vaults became so secure that kings trusted them with royal treasuries, and their cryptic bookkeeping methods baffled outsiders. A single ledger might look like innocent monastic records to the untrained eye, but to a Templar, those numbers and symbols mapped everything from secret trade routes to political alliances. Their fortresses told a similar story of hidden genius. At first glance, Templar castles like Toma in Portugal or Chait au Pèlerin in the Holy Land were impenetrable marvels of military engineering. But look closer, and you'd find peculiar details, hidden staircases that led to underground scriptoriums, chapels aligned with celestial events, and cryptic carvings that seemed to serve no structural purpose. These weren't just defensive structures, they were living libraries of esoteric knowledge, where architecture itself became a form of coded communication. Then there were the rituals, elaborate initiation ceremonies conducted in torchlit chambers, where new members swore oaths of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But historians still debate whether these rites were purely spiritual or held deeper, secret layers. Some accounts describe candidates being shown mysterious symbols or tested with cryptic questions, suggesting an inner circle within the Brotherhood. What's undeniable is how effectively these traditions bound the order together. When Templars were captured during the Crusades, they famously endured torture rather than betray their secrets, a loyalty so absolute it unnerved even their enemies. Yet iron, for all its strength, has a weakness: it attracts lightning. The Templars' very power sealed their fate. By the early 14th century, their influence had grown too vast, their wealth too conspicuous. King Philip IV of France, drowning in debt to the order, engineered their downfall with chilling precision. On Friday, the 13th of October 1307, Templars across Europe were arrested en masse, accused of heresy and blasphemy. Their libraries burned, their treasures seized, and their Grand Master burned at the stake. But here's the twist: even in destruction, their legacy endured. Rumors swirled that surviving Templars had smuggled their secrets to Scotland or Portugal. Their symbols resurfaced in later fraternal orders, from the Freemasons to modern chivalric groups. And that's the ultimate lesson of the Templars. When you combine the permanence of ink with the might of iron, even a king's wrath can't erase your mark on history. Their story proves that the most powerful secrets aren't just hidden, they're armored, both in steel and in symbols, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered. Beneath the flickering light of a single candle, an alchemist hunches over a manuscript, sketching a serpent swallowing its own tail, the Ouroboros. To the untrained eye, it's just an odd drawing. But to those initiated into the hidden world of medieval alchemy, it's a profound secret: the cycle of destruction and rebirth, the endless transformation of matter and spirit. This was the language of symbols, a coded lexicon that turned parchment into a vault of forbidden knowledge. Alchemists weren't just eccentric tinkerers, they were the intellectual rebels of their age. In a time when the Church dictated what could be studied, these thinkers cloaked their experiments in layers of metaphor. A recipe for purifying the green lion might sound like nonsense, but to an apprentice, it revealed the precise steps to extract gold from ore using acid. Their manuscripts were labyrinths of meaning, where dragons represented volatile elements and weddings between celestial bodies symbolized chemical reactions. This wasn't mere secrecy, it was survival. A misunderstood formula could land you on a pyre. Take the Philosopher's Stone, the most famous of alchemical pursuits. Popular legend reduces it to a magical rock that turns lead into gold, but its true purpose was far grander. Alchemists like the legendary Hermes Trismegistus wrote of it as a spiritual catalyst, a key to unlocking the divine potential within humanity. Their great work wasn't just about transmuting metals, it was about refining the soul. A 15th century text might describe dissolving a king in acid, only to resurrect him in purified form. To outsiders, it sounded like sacrilege. To initiates, it was a roadmap to enlightenment. The way this knowledge spread was just as ingenious. Alchemists operated through tight-knit guilds and master-apprentice chains, where wisdom was passed orally or through meticulously copied manuscripts. A master might give his student a single page filled with bizarre imagery, a sun swallowing a moon, a bird with two heads, and expect them to decipher the chemical process hidden within. This system created layers of understanding. What a novice saw as literal, an adept recognized as allegory. Their symbols still whisper to us today. The caduceus, that staff entwined with serpents, wasn't just an alchemical emblem, it's now the universal symbol of medicine. The Ouroboros appears in modern psychology as a representation of wholeness. Even the iconic rose cross, once a secret alchemical diagram, now adorns everything from jewelry to corporate logos. The alchemists' greatest trick wasn't turning lead into gold. It was embedding their hidden language so deeply into culture that we still use it, often without realizing where it came from. What made these ink wizards truly remarkable was their dual legacy. They advanced practical chemistry, discovering acids, alloys, and tinctures that shaped medicine and metallurgy, while simultaneously crafting a philosophical tradition that inspired everything from Renaissance humanism to modern psychology. In an age where knowledge was power, they proved that the pen and the crucible could be mightier than the sword. Their manuscripts weren't just books, they were time capsules, ensuring that even if their laboratories were raided, their ideas would survive, waiting for future generations to crack the code. Walk into any medieval city, and you'd hear the rhythmic clang of hammers on anvils long before you saw the blacksmith's forge. These workshops weren't just workplaces, they were fortresses of tradecraft, where apprentices toiled for years just to glimpse the closely guarded techniques that made their masters indispensable. Guilds like the stonemasons, goldsmiths, and armorers didn't just pass down skills, they wrapped them in layers of ritual and secrecy as intricate as the iron filigree on a cathedral gate. Consider the masons' architects of Europe's soaring cathedrals. Their blueprint scrolls weren't left lying about for rivals to copy. Instead, they encoded measurements in cryptic symbols, shared only during initiation ceremonies where new members swore blood oaths of silence. A single page might show what looked like simple geometric patterns, but to a master mason, those lines revealed the exact angle to cut a keystone or the secret formula for mortar that could withstand centuries. Some even believe these symbols evolved into the elaborate tracing boards used by modern Freemasons, proof that trade secrets could outlast the guilds themselves. The blacksmiths took secrecy even further. Their guild halls doubled as vaults for techniques like Damascus steel forging, a process so closely guarded that when the last smiths of medieval Syria vanished, the method was lost for centuries. Apprentices learned through riddles and demonstrations rather than written instructions. A master might say, "Temper the blade in the tears of the moon," which translated to quenching steel in water exposed to moonlight at precise phases. To outsiders, it sounded like superstition. To initiates, it was precise metallurgical wisdom. But guild secrecy wasn't just about protecting profits, it was political. When the butchers of Paris formed their guild in the 12th century, they didn't just standardize meat prices. They built a shadow network that controlled food supplies to the royal court, making kings think twice before crossing them. Glassmakers in Venice were literally confined to the island of Murano, not just to prevent fires, but to stop their mirror-making techniques from leaking to foreign powers. These weren't just craftsmen, they were power brokers who understood that specialized knowledge equaled leverage. Perhaps the most fascinating evidence of guilds as proto-secret societies lies in their art. Next time you see a medieval stained glass window, look closer. Those vibrant biblical scenes often hide guild symbols, a carpenter's square discreetly placed in a saint's hand, or a tanner's knife woven into a tapestry's border. Even the gargoyles crouching on cathedrals sometimes bear the tools of local trades, watching over cities like stone guardians of occupational secrets. The genius of the guild system was its duality. On the surface, they were respectable civic organizations, hosting public festivals and funding charities. But behind closed doors, they operated with the discretion of clandestine orders, using coded language, secret handshakes, and even disguised apprentices sent to spy on rival workshops. In an era when most people couldn't read, their combination of oral tradition and encrypted manuscripts created an unbreakable chain of knowledge, one that ensured their techniques would survive wars, plagues, and the rise and fall of empires. What these guilds understood, and what we often forget, is that secrecy isn't inherently sinister. Sometimes it's the only way to preserve excellence in a world where knowledge is power. Their legacy reminds us that every time we admire a medieval tapestry, walk under a Gothic arch, or hold an antique blade, we're touching the handiwork of history's most practical secret keepers. In the shadow of medieval cathedrals, where the scent of incense mingled with the ever-present threat of heresy trials, radical thinkers dared to imagine a different kind of faith. The Cathars of southern France didn't just question church authority, they rejected it entirely, preaching that the material world was a prison created by a false god. Their sacred texts, painstakingly copied on hidden presses, taught that salvation came through knowledge, not ritual. When Crusaders stormed their stronghold at Montségur in 1244, they didn't just burn buildings, they built bonfires of books, believing that destroying the words would erase the ideas. But one Cathar perfectus facing the flames reportedly shouted, "The fire cannot reach the truth." What made these sects so dangerous wasn't just their belief, it was their mastery of ink as a weapon. The Waldensians, founded by a merchant named Valders who dared to translate the Bible into common language, turned pockets and pilgrim robes into smuggling compartments for handwritten gospels. Their followers memorized entire books to recite from memory if caught, an underground network of living libraries. A single Waldensian woman might know the Book of John by heart, passing it to her children like a whispered inheritance. The Church's response revealed its deepest fear, that ideas could be deadlier than armies. Dominican inquisitors developed meticulous record-keeping to track heresy, creating a dark mirror of the very literacy they sought to suppress. When they interrogated suspects, they weren't just hunting people, they were hunting knowledge. A single copied verse from an unauthorized Bible could condemn a family to generations of surveillance. Iron in the form of swords, shackles, and execution pyres became the blunt instrument against this intellectual rebellion. Yet the survival strategies of these groups read like a manual for intellectual resistance. Cathar perfecti traveled as pairs, never carrying written words, teaching through coded parables that mixed scripture with local folklore. A story about a fox might secretly critique papal corruption. A song about vineyards could encode meeting locations. They turned the Church's own tools against it. While bishops commissioned lavish, illuminated manuscripts, heretics produced tiny, crudely bound books that could be hidden in a loaf of bread or buried in clay pots. The most fascinating legacy lies in what scholars call the shadow canon, texts that survived through sheer ingenuity. A Cathar ritual might be disguised as a troubadour's love poem, copied into the margins of an approved prayer book. Some Waldensian teachings resurfaced centuries later in Protestant Reformation pamphlets, proving that ideas burned in one era could rise from the ashes in another. Even today, librarians occasionally discover medieval manuscripts with odd annotations, strange symbols in the margins that hint at secret readings by forbidden sects. This underground war of ink versus iron reshaped Europe in ways we're still uncovering. The Church's obsession with controlling written words led directly to the first censorship indexes, precursors to modern copyright laws. The heretics' need to hide their beliefs accelerated cryptography, with some scholars arguing that their symbol systems influenced early merchant banking codes. Most importantly, these clashes proved a timeless truth. When you outlaw certain thoughts, you don't eliminate them. You simply drive them deeper where they grow stronger in the dark. The parchment might burn, but the words, once set free, become fireproof. In the early 17th century, a curious pamphlet surfaced in Germany, its pages crackling with intrigue. Titled the Fama Fraternitatis, it told the story of Christian Rosicrucian, a mythical traveler who supposedly uncovered ancient wisdom in the Middle East and founded a secret brotherhood of enlightened scholars. The text was unlike anything Europe had seen, part manifesto, part riddle, inviting readers to seek out this invisible college of adepts while giving no concrete instructions on how to find them. Overnight, the Rosicrucian legend was born, not from swords or secret handshakes, but from ink and imagination alone. What made these manuscripts so explosive was their ambiguity. The Fama and its companion texts, like the Confessio Fraternitatis, were layered with alchemical metaphors, astrological diagrams, and veiled references to political reform. A passage about purifying the world might hint at spiritual awakening or a call to overthrow corrupt monarchies. This deliberate obscurity turned every reader into a detective scouring lines for hidden meanings. Soon, letters flooded European universities from scholars claiming to be Rosicrucians or demanding to meet them. The irony, no one could prove the order even existed. The genius of the Rosicrucian hoax, if it was a hoax, lay in its design. By never presenting physical evidence, the creators ensured their ideas couldn't be destroyed. A society that existed only in books couldn't be raided like a Templar preceptory. Its members couldn't be burned at the stake because they were phantoms. The movement thrived precisely because it was untouchable, its influence spreading through salons and universities like ink blots on parchment. Yet the real magic happened when these ideas leaped from page to practice. Freemasons in the 18th century adopted Rosicrucian symbols. The rose cross motif appeared in lodge artwork, and their rituals echoed the Fama's themes of enlightenment through hidden knowledge. Even Sir Isaac Newton, that titan of science, filled his notebooks with Rosicrucian-inspired alchemical research, proving how these cryptic texts blurred the line between mysticism and empirical inquiry. The Rosicrucian enigma forces us to ask, does a secret society need flesh and blood members to change history? Their legacy suggests otherwise. By weaponizing curiosity, these manuscripts did what armies couldn't. They turned seekers into disciples and words into a movement. Centuries later, their greatest trick endures, making us wonder if the invisible college was ever just ink, or if it's still out there waiting to be found. In the great halls of medieval castles, justice wasn't always blindfolded. Sometimes it wore a hood. While commoners faced judgment in crowded courtyards, the nobility and those accused of heresy often found themselves dragged before tribunals so secretive, even the walls seemed to whisper. Picture this, a windowless chamber lit by guttering torches, where a masked scribe's quill scratches across parchment, recording confessions extracted in shadows. These weren't courts as we know them, they were theaters of power, where ink and iron conspired to rewrite reality itself. Take the infamous Weimgericht of Germany, a clandestine judicial system that operated outside royal authority. Composed of free knights and burghers, these secret courts convened at midnight in forest clearings or beneath hollow oaks. Defendants might receive a cryptic summons, a knife left on their doorstep, or a broken twig placed in their path, before disappearing into trials where witnesses wore black robes and verdicts were delivered in rhyming couplets to avoid written records. Those found guilty faced immediate execution, their bodies left hanging as warnings. What made the Weim so terrifying wasn't just its brutality, but its bureaucracy. Each judgment was sealed with a unique symbol pressed into wax, creating an archive of fear that made even kings hesitate to interfere. The Church's inquisitorial courts perfected a darker art, turning parchment into a weapon. Scribes developed shorthand symbols to encode torture methods. A tiny flame next to a name might indicate thumb screws applied, while a drop symbol hinted at waterboarding. Some trial records survive with entire pages carefully cut out, leaving historians to wonder what truths were deemed too dangerous to preserve. In one chilling example from 13th century France, a scribe doodled a gallows in the margin of an otherwise dry legal manuscript, perhaps an inside joke among clerks or a silent protest against the system they served. But the real power of these secret courts lay in their ambiguity. Without public proceedings, rumors filled the void. A nobleman vanishing after a private hearing might be whispered to have joined a secret society or been sacrificed in some arcane ritual. When Joan of Arc was tried for heresy in 1431, the English ensured the trial records were heavily edited, crafting a narrative of guilt before her ashes had even cooled. Centuries later, Napoleon would use similarly manipulated documents to justify purges, proving how medieval tactics of judicial secrecy could be repurposed for modern tyranny. The legacy of these shadow tribunals lingers in plain sight. Modern phrases like kangaroo court or star chamber trace straight back to medieval fears of justice twisted behind closed doors. Conspiracy theories about secret elite trials, whether imagined Illuminati tribunals or paranoid fantasies of deep state operations, are distant echoes of a time when the law itself was a whispered rumor. What the feudal world understood, and what we sometimes forget, is that the most potent power isn't just controlling actions, it's controlling the story. And in that silent war between truth and tyranny, ink has always been the deadliest blade. Imagine gripping a Viking sword, its blade cold and deadly, but look closer. Along the fuller, strange symbols shimmer in the firelight, runes carved deep into the iron. To most warriors, this was just a weapon, but to the rune master who inscribed it, those markings were more potent than the sharpest edge, a fusion of ink and iron that could decide battles before the first blow was struck. Viking culture didn't separate the mystical from the martial. A runestone wasn't just a memorial, it was a conduit to the gods, its inscriptions believed to carry spells across centuries. Warriors wore amulets stamped with the Aegis-Jolma, the helm of Or, not as mere decoration, but as literal armor against misfortune. Even their ships bore runes near the prow, whispering protection into the wind. This wasn't superstition, it was a sophisticated system where language itself became a weapon. The rune masters occupied a space between skald and sorcerer. Unlike Christian monks who guarded secrets in locked scriptoria, these pagan sages preserved knowledge through relentless memorization. A single rune poem might encode layers of meaning. The letter Fehu, letter 16A0, represented wealth, but also cattle, and by extension, the cycles of life and fortune. To speak these verses aloud wasn't just recitation, it was an act of power, shaping reality through rhythm and breath, their most chilling practice, blood runes. Sagas tell of warriors carving symbols onto their own flesh before battle, mixing ink with blood to awaken magic. The legendary Egil Skallagrimsson once saved himself from poisoning by scratching runes into his drinking horn, then watching the vessel shatter as the spell took effect. Whether myth or misunderstood science, these stories reveal a core truth. Vikings saw no divide between the physical and the mystical. A rune carved with precision could heal a wound, curse an enemy, or ensure a king's favor as surely as a well-aimed axe. What set rune masters apart from other secret keepers was their deliberate ambiguity. Christian scribes hid texts to protect them. Vikings designed their symbols to resist interpretation. A runestone might stand in plain view for generations, its message legible to all, but only the initiated understood the hidden layers. The Rök stone in Sweden, for instance, appears to recount a hero's deeds. Until you realize its kennings and riddles point to an apocalyptic prophecy, this tradition didn't vanish with longships. When Norse lands Christianized, runes didn't disappear, they went underground. Carvers began mixing crosses with Thor's hammers, and the old symbols resurfaced in folk charms, disguised as mere decoration. Even today, fragments of runic magic endure, Icelandic staves used for protection, or fishermen's tattoos echoing ancient voyage spells. The rune master's greatest feat wasn't just preserving their art, it was ensuring that even in defeat, their ink and iron outlasted empires. While knights clashed in European mud and monks scraped parchment clean to copy fading Latin texts, a revolution in knowledge was unfolding under the domes of Baghdad's House of Wisdom. Founded in the 8th century by Caliph Harun al-Rashid, this wasn't just a library, it was a factory of ideas where Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars worked side by side, translating Aristotle into Arabic, refining Ptolemy's star charts, and debating medicine in rooms lined with shelves of imported Chinese paper. Their mission, to gather every scrap of human knowledge, whether from Athens, Alexandria, or the Silk Road, and forge something new. The scale of their ambition still stuns historians. At its peak, the House of Wisdom employed over 90 full-time translators, paid their weight in gold to render ancient texts with meticulous precision. But they didn't just preserve, they upgraded. When Persian scholar Al-Khwarizmi encountered Indian numerals, he didn't merely copy them. He built an entire new branch of mathematics around them, giving us algebra from his book Al-Kitab al-Mukhtasar fi Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabala. Meanwhile, in Cordoba, the Umayyad Library's catalogue alone spanned 44 volumes, detailing works on optics, chemistry, and even mechanical engineering that wouldn't reach Europe for centuries. Protecting this knowledge required both ink and iron. While scribes perfected the art of paper-making using linen rags to create sheets far more durable than brittle parchment, guardians like the legendary Banu Musa brothers designed ingenious locks for their libraries. Some manuscripts were stored in underground vaults accessible only by solving geometric puzzles. Others had titles written in disappearing ink that revealed themselves when warmed by candlelight. When Mongol armies sacked Baghdad in 1258, survivors smuggled texts out in pottery jars or memorized entire books to reconstruct them later. The real secret wasn't just what these libraries held, but how knowledge traveled. Jewish merchants acting as cultural middlemen carried Arabic medical texts to Sicily, where Norman kings had them translated into Latin. In Toledo, after Christian reconquest, scholars set up a translation mill where teams worked in relay, an Arabic speaker dictating to a Mozarabic Christian who translated into Castilian, then a Jew rendering it into Latin. This clandestine pipeline would eventually deliver the lost works of Aristotle, Euclid, and Hippocrates back to a Europe that had forgotten them. What makes these Islamic libraries so extraordinary is their legacy of open secrecy. Unlike European monastic scriptoria that hoarded knowledge, the House of Wisdom actively recruited scholars from every culture. Their secret wasn't exclusion, it was intentional inclusion, hiding wisdom in plain sight across languages and faiths until the world was ready to receive it. When Renaissance thinkers like Copernicus and Da Vinci finally accessed these texts, they weren't just rediscovering antiquity, they were meeting the refined, annotated versions that Baghdad scholars had spent centuries perfecting. The ink had been preserved, the iron had done its duty, and the light of those hidden libraries still illuminates our world today. Behind the high stone walls of medieval nunneries, a quiet revolution was unfolding. While the outside world saw these convents as mere retreats for pious women, they functioned as something far more radical sanctuaries of female intellect and autonomy. In an era when women were barred from universities and their voices silenced in public discourse, the cloister became the one place where a woman could wield both quill and authority. The Benedictine abbess Hildegard of Bingen didn't just compose hymns and prayers, she wrote groundbreaking treatises on medicine, cosmology, and the soul, her words flowing as freely as the ink in her scriptorium. What made these institutions so subversive was their dual nature. On the surface, they obeyed the church's rules. Behind the grill, they cultivated knowledge that would have raised eyebrows, or worse if practiced by women outside. Take herbalism, for instance. While male physicians dismissed women's remedies as superstition, nuns like those at the Abbey of St. Walburga in Germany compiled detailed pharmacopoeias, recording cures for everything from fever to childbirth complications. Their illuminated manuscripts mixed scripture with diagrams of medicinal plants, the vibrant pigments hiding practical wisdom beneath sacred imagery. Some even suspect these texts encoded midwifery techniques considered taboo by the male medical establishment. The physical structure of nunneries themselves became instruments of secrecy. Their fortified walls, originally meant to protect chastity, also shielded intellectual pursuits. At the convent of Sant'Ambrogio in Milan, archaeologists uncovered a hidden compartment beneath the choir stalls containing treatises on Neoplatonic philosophy, a subject considered dangerously speculative for women. Other convents used double libraries, one collection of approved devotional works for visitors to see, and another of controversial texts accessible only to initiates. The iron bars on their windows kept the world out, but more importantly, they kept knowledge in. Hildegard's story exemplifies this delicate dance between devotion and defiance. When she began receiving divine visions, she didn't proclaim them publicly. She sought papal approval first, wrapping her mystical experiences in the cloak of orthodoxy. Once sanctioned, however, her revelations became a vehicle for unprecedented critiques. Her civias didn't just describe heavenly sights, it challenged clerical corruption and advocated for ecological stewardship centuries before such ideas entered mainstream thought. She even designed her own alphabet, the lingua ignota, possibly to encrypt sensitive discussions among her sisters. The legacy of these scholarly nuns ripples through history in unexpected ways. The beautiful Hortus Deliciarum, created by Herod of Landsberg at Hohenberg Abbey, wasn't just a theological encyclopedia, it preserved fragments of classical texts otherwise lost to time. The musical innovations of abbesses like Hildegard laid groundwork for polyphonic harmonies that would define Renaissance music. And when Protestant reformers began attacking monasticism in the 16th century, many convent libraries were smuggled to sympathetic noblewomen's homes, ensuring their survival. These women understood something profound, that sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't loud defiance but quiet persistence. Their ink-stained fingers copied not just psalms, but possibilities, proof that even in the darkest ages, light could be kept alive behind convent walls, one carefully guarded manuscript at a time. The Holy Roman Empire wasn't an empire in any traditional sense. It was a patchwork of feuding duchies, bishoprics, and free cities held together by fragile threads of loyalty and deception. In this chaotic landscape, where an emperor's authority often ended at the next town's gates, survival depended on secrets. Noble families like the Habsburgs and Hohenstaufens didn't just rule openly. They cultivated intricate networks of informants, their alliances sealed with wax imprinted with personal sigils designed to be recognized only by trusted allies. A single misplaced letter could spark a war or end a bloodline. Take the infamous Geheimnis, documents, private treaties written in cipher, where the true terms were hidden beneath layers of courtly niceties. A phrase like "the roses bloom in Burgundy" might signal an impending invasion, while "our mutual friend sends his regards" could mean a rival had been poisoned. These weren't just messages, they were puzzles designed to be meaningless if intercepted. The Chancery of Frederick II, that enigmatic Holy Roman Emperor who spoke 6 languages and kept a zoo of exotic animals, employed Jewish and Arab cryptographers to develop ciphers so complex that some remain unsolved today. But ink alone wasn't enough. Every noble worth their salt maintained a Leibgard, a personal army of knights sworn to absolute secrecy. Unlike royal troops, these fighters answered only to their lord, no matter what the emperor decreed. The von Wittelsbach family of Bavaria went a step further, housing their retainers in a labyrinth of tunnels beneath their castles, ensuring they could strike or vanish without warning. When Duke Henry the Lion fell from grace, it wasn't battlefield defeat that ruined him. It was the discovery of his private correspondence promising Saxon silver to the Pope's enemies. The Church played its own shadow games. Prince-bishops, those dual wielders of crozier and sword, operated as spiritual leaders by day and puppet masters by night. The Archbishop of Mainz once bankrupted a rival by flooding the market with counterfeit coins stamped with the man's face, a medieval smear campaign that collapsed his credit and left him vulnerable to assassination. Meanwhile, abbesses like those in Quedlinburg Abbey ran intelligence networks from their cloisters, using pilgrim routes to smuggle messages between dissident nobles. What makes these machinations so eerily modern is their bureaucratic precision. The Fugger banking family of Augsburg didn't just finance emperors. They kept Schattenbücher, shadow ledgers recording every bribe and blackmail operation. One survives, its pages dotted with cryptic symbols, a tiny dagger next to a name indicating a paid assassin, or a chalice marking a cardinal compromised by scandal. This wasn't just corruption, it was institutionalized subterfuge, a system where power flowed through hidden channels as much as public decrees. The empire's eventual collapse left behind a curious legacy. Those wax-sealed ciphers evolved into the diplomatic codes of Renaissance Italy, while private armies inspired the mercenary companies that plagued Europe for centuries. Even today, when politicians speak of back-channel communications or plausible deniability, they're echoing the Geheimnis playbook, proof that the darkest arts of medieval realpolitik never truly vanished. They just learned to wear a suit instead of a surcoat. In the flickering glow of a village hearth, where the scent of burning peat mingled with the murmurs of an enraptured crowd, history wasn't written, it was sung. Long before parchment reached peasant hands, the true archives of the people lived in the throats of bards and the rhythmic clap of a grandmother's loom. These weren't just entertainers, they were the librarians of the illiterate, their ballads and folktales encoding everything from forbidden love affairs to the locations of hidden grain stores during feudal raids. Spinning wheels might mask whispered verses about a local lord's cruelty, while children's rhymes preserved maps to secret forest clearings where outlaws gathered. The genius of oral tradition lay in its deniability. A minstrel singing about a clever fox outwitting a wolf could simultaneously amuse children and critique corrupt sheriffs, all while guardsmen chuckled along, oblivious. In Ireland, the ancient Censure storytellers wove genealogies and land claims into epic tales, ensuring generations remembered who truly owned what long before written deeds existed. When Norman invaders tried to erase Gaelic culture, these oral archives became resistance weapons. A single ballad like Donal Org could preserve a banned language for centuries. Iron took on mythic weight in these stories. The blacksmith's hammer in Welsh folklore wasn't just a tool, it was the weapon Dynwen, a sword that burst into flames for worthy wielders. Slavic Bylany epics told of peasant plowshares reforged into swords when invaders came, blurring the line between farming and fighting. Even the humble kitchen knife transformed in tales like the clever peasant girl, where it becomes a symbol of quiet defiance, carving justice from the loaf of oppression. This oral underground had its own initiation rites. Appalachian ballad singers still practice the lining out technique, a call and response system where the leader sings a line and the crowd repeats it. Scholars now recognize this as more than performance. It was a medieval mnemonic device, ensuring subversive lyrics spread without leaving evidence. Similar methods appear from West Africa's griots to Mongolian throat singers, proving that secret societies need neither lodges nor passwords when they have rhythm and rhyme. The Church's attempts to suppress this folk heresy only made it stronger. When medieval councils banned certain songs, bards simply changed a few words. The Greenwood ballads about Robin Hood evolved from pagan forest rituals to Christian-friendly outlaw tales without losing their rebellious core. In the Pyrenees, shepherds used yodeling patterns to signal approaching inquisitors, their melodies carrying farther than any shout. Even today, the Kalevala, Finland's national epic, reconstructed from oral fragments, contains traces of pre-Christian spells disguised as poetry. What these voices understood was immortality. Parchment burns, stone crumbles, but a story, once lodged in the collective memory, is nearly impossible to erase. The proof: we still recount versions of Cinderella that originated as Chinese Yixian tales in the 9th century, or recognize King Arthur's sword Excalibur, though its earliest telling was just a Welsh campfire story. The true secret society wasn't an order with robes and rituals. It was the unbroken chain of human voices, passing truths like embers from hand to hand, ensuring no darkness could ever fully extinguish them. The year was 1348, and the air smelled of rotting flesh and burning herbs. As the Black Death swept through Europe, wiping out entire villages in weeks, people searched desperately for anyone to blame. In the shadows of this terror, handwritten pamphlets began circulating in city squares, their crude illustrations showing hooded figures poisoning wells under cover of night. These weren't just warnings, they were death warrants inked on cheap parchment, fueling hysteria that would turn neighbor against neighbor. One particularly vicious rumor claimed Jewish communities were orchestrating the plague as part of a secret plot. Never mind that Jewish doctors were often on the front lines, treating the sick with the same herbal remedies as their Christian counterparts. The pamphlets, many authored by anonymous scribes, insisted they'd found confessions extracted under torture, detailing supposed plans to spread disease using poisoned powders smuggled in prayer books. The truth: those powders were likely spices or medicinal herbs, mundane items twisted into evidence by panic. But when mobs stormed the Jewish quarter of Strasbourg in 1349, rationality didn't matter. Over 900 people were burned alive based on nothing more than inked lies and the clang of swords herding them to the pyre. The scapegoating wasn't limited to religious minorities. In Milan, authorities arrested two men, a gravedigger and a beggar, accusing them of smearing plague-tainted ointment on door handles. Their trial lasted less than an hour, their guilt assumed because someone claimed to have seen them muttering strange words. Their punishment, being walled alive inside their own homes, stones mortared over the doors as townsfolk listened to their fading cries. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, wandering flagellants penitents who whipped themselves to atone for humanity's sins formed their own shadowy networks. Though initially tolerated, their secretive midnight rituals soon sparked rumors they were actually witches summoning the plague. Dozens were executed without trial, their blood staining the same cobblestones they'd once scrubbed clean in devotion. What made this era's conspiracy theories so deadly was their marriage of ink and iron. A single anonymous letter could doom a family, like the case of a midwife in Provence accused of stealing breaths from newborns to power her spells. No evidence was needed, just the right words whispered to the wrong crowd. Surviving court records show how easily accusations snowballed. A drunken rant about well poisoners at a tavern might appear in a bailiff's report the next day, then morph into an official decree by week's end. The parchment gave mob violence a veneer of legitimacy, turning lynching into justice. But perhaps the most chilling parallel to modern times lies in how these myths outlasted the plague itself. Decades after the last outbreak, towns still maintained plague registers listing suspected conspirators, their descendants barred from holding office or marrying into clean families. The same tactics used against Jews resurfaced during the witch hunts, then again during the Reformation, proving how easily fear hardens into tradition. The lesson here isn't just about medieval cruelty, it's about the anatomy of a lie. When people face the unimaginable, they'll often choose a comforting fiction over a terrifying truth. And in that gap between reality and rumor, the darkest chapters of history are written, not with grand proclamations, but with hurried notes passed hand to hand, each smudged word a spark waiting to ignite violence. The plague eventually faded, but the machinery of suspicion it built remained, oiled and ready for the next crisis. Sound familiar, standing before the soaring spires of Chartres Cathedral, most visitors crane their necks to admire the stained glass or the intricate stone carvings. But look closer, those carvings tell stranger stories than scripture alone. Among the saints and biblical scenes, you'll find zodiac signs, green men with leaves sprouting from their mouths, and even what appears to be an alchemist's workshop hidden in a capital. These aren't accidents or pagan holdovers, they're deliberate puzzles carved in stone by master builders who understood architecture as a language. The cathedral's labyrinthine floor offers the first clue. Worshippers once walked its winding path on their knees as penance, but the pattern itself holds deeper meaning. Follow its turns with a compass, and you'll discover it encodes precise geometric ratios, the same proportions medieval masons used to calculate structural stability. Some scholars argue the labyrinth also mirrors the celestial motions of certain stars, turning the entire nave into a kind of astronomical clock. Then there's the light. Gothic cathedrals didn't just use stained glass for beauty, they weaponized it. At certain times of year, sunlight streams through specific windows to illuminate hidden carvings or trace golden paths across the floor. In Chartres, a single beam strikes a particular flagstone only on the summer solstice, a phenomenon that would have required painstaking calculations without modern tools. But the real secrets lurk in the margins. While church authorities approved the main biblical imagery, Masons smuggled esoteric knowledge into the decorative flourishes. A capital in Rheims Cathedral shows a woman holding a tablet inscribed with Hebrew letters, an astonishing inclusion in 13th century France, where Jewish scholarship was often suppressed. Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland takes this further, with over 100 musical cubes carved into its arches that some believe encode a lost medieval chant when played correctly. The debate over these features splits historians. Traditionalists dismiss them as fanciful ornament, but others point to the meticulous planning behind every detail. Consider the Rose Line at Notre Dame de Paris, an invisible axis running through the center of its famous rose window, aligning with key architectural features in a way that mirrors sacred geometry found in Kabbalistic texts. Perhaps the most compelling evidence lies in the guilds themselves. Medieval masons guarded their techniques fiercely, passing down knowledge through symbols and handshakes rather than written manuals. A surviving stained glass panel from Chartres actually shows two master builders exchanging what appears to be a coded gesture, one hand hidden in a sleeve while the other forms a specific shape. These stone enigmas raise profound questions. Were cathedrals the medieval equivalent of encrypted hard drives, storing forbidden knowledge in plain sight? Or were they simply the ultimate expression of an era that saw no divide between science, art, and faith? Either way, their silent language still speaks to those who know how to look, not just with eyes, but with the patience to decipher the ink of chisel marks and the iron will that raised these monuments to the sky. The Inquisition didn't just burn heretics, they documented them. Every confession, every accusation, every scream extracted in the dungeons was meticulously recorded by scribes whose quills scratched across parchment with cold precision. These weren't mere notes, they were blueprints of fear, turning ink into chains and parchment into prison walls. Imagine a windowless chamber where a trembling suspect sat across from an inquisitor, while a hooded notary transcribed every word, every hesitation, even the way their voice cracked under pressure. The real power wasn't just in the torture devices, it was in the ledger books that turned whispers into verdicts. One particularly chilling example survives in the archives of Toulouse, the Manual for Inquisitors by Bernard Gouy, a 14th century text so detailed it reads like a dark parody of a cookbook. Gouy didn't just list heresies, he categorized them like recipes with instructions on how to prepare each type of suspect. Waldensians were to be questioned about their knowledge of scripture, Cathars probed on their dualist beliefs, and Beguines mystical laywomen tested for false visions. The manual even included sample dialogues, scripting entire interrogations like a playwright crafting a tragedy. Gouy understood something sinister, that bureaucracy could be as lethal as the rack. But the true horror lay in how these records spiraled beyond individual cases. Once a name entered the Inquisition's ledgers, it tainted entire bloodlines. In Catalonia, surviving family trees show marginal notes like grandson of a Lollard or niece of a condemned, marks that barred descendants from holding office or marrying into clean families for generations. The ink didn't fade, it metastasized, turning parchment into a kind of genetic stigma. Even death offered no escape. Posthumous trials were common, with corpses exhumed and burned if new evidence surfaced. The darkest irony, the Inquisition's obsession with record-keeping mirrored the very heresies it sought to eradicate. Just as Cathars guarded their sacred texts in hidden caves, inquisitors stored their archives in fortified towers, accessible only to trusted clerics. Both sides knew the stakes: control the narrative and you control reality. When the medieval Inquisition finally waned, its methods didn't disappear, they evolved. The Spanish Inquisition's infamous auto da fe ceremonies were as much about public record as punishment, with condemned heretics forced to wear San Benito's humiliating tunics painted with their crimes, that were then hung in churches as permanent warnings. Yet for all their efficiency, the inquisitors left behind an unintended gift, proof of resistance. Between the lines of dry Latin transcripts, we find moments of breathtaking defiance. A Waldensian woman in Provence, when asked to recant, reportedly told her interrogators, "You may take my flesh, but my soul belongs to no man's ledger." A scribe in Carcassonne, perhaps moved by conscience, left tiny doodles of birds in the margins of trial records, as if offering the accused symbolic flight. Even the paper itself rebelled. Many parchments were later found scraped clean and reused, the original accusations literally erased by time. What the Inquisition's archives teach us isn't just about medieval cruelty, it's about the anatomy of institutional terror. Their genius was realizing that a well-organized filing system could be more durable than any dungeon. But in their zeal to erase dissent, they preserved its echoes, leaving behind not just a record of oppression, but proof that even the most carefully inked chains can't stifle the human spirit forever. In the candlelit study halls of medieval Spain and Provence, where the air hummed with murmured prayers and the scratch of quills on parchment, Jewish Kabbalists wove secrets into the very fabric of Scripture. To the untrained eye, their texts were commentaries on the Torah, but hidden beneath the surface swirled a universe of divine emanations, cosmic trees, and letters that pulsed with the heartbeat of creation. This was no idle mysticism. It was an act of intellectual defiance, a way to preserve sacred knowledge even as pogroms and expulsions threatened to erase Jewish thought from Europe. Take the Zohar, Kabbalah's foundational text, which surfaced in 13th century Spain like a message in a bottle. Written in cryptic Aramaic and attributed to the 2nd century sage Shimon bar Yochai, its pages map the Sephirot, 10 divine attributes through which the infinite interacts with the finite. But the brilliance lay in its encoding. A passage about Adam's sin might simultaneously describe the soul's journey, the structure of the cosmos, and a veiled critique of contemporary rulers. Christian censors scanning for heresy would see only pious exegesis, while initiates deciphered layers of subversive wisdom. The Kabbalists' methods mirrored their monastic counterparts with a crucial difference. Where Christian scribes hid forbidden texts in abbey vaults, Jewish scholars embedded secrets within sacred scripture itself. A technique called gematria assigned numerical values to Hebrew letters, allowing words with matching sums to reveal hidden connections. The word for serpent, Nachash, and Messiah, Mashiach, both equal 358, a paradox suggesting redemption grows from the very root of temptation. Other codes, like Notarican breaking words into acronyms or Timura letter substitutions, turned every scroll into a puzzle box of meaning. Their resilience went beyond ink. When the Spanish Inquisition forced Jewish conversions, Kabbalah became a lifeline for crypto-Jews. A seemingly Christian home might display a painting of the Last Supper, but those who knew would spot the Sephirot hidden in the folds of the apostles' robes, or the Hebrew letters subtly woven into the tablecloth. In Portugal, women preserved rituals by baking angel bread with secret blessings, their kitchens becoming makeshift sanctuaries. The irony, this persecuted tradition would later fuel the very elites who'd exiled its keepers. Renaissance scholars like Pico della Mirandola became obsessed with Kabbalah, believing it held keys to Christian truth. Alchemists pored over Hebrew texts for clues to the philosopher's stone, while Freemasons adapted its symbols into large rituals. Even today, traces linger from tarot cards originally based on Sephirotic paths to the phrase Holy Grail, which some argue derives from Keter, the highest Sephira. What made Kabbalah unstoppable was its duality. It wasn't just a survival tactic, but a vision so expansive it could nest within other systems without losing its core. The ink flowed underground, the iron never broke, and the light of those study halls still flickers in places you'd least expect proof that the most powerful ideas aren't just preserved. They evolve. The legend of Prester John began with a single letter, or rather, a series of them, each more fantastical than the last, penned in flawless Latin on parchment, allegedly stamped with exotic wax seals. These missives claimed to be from a Christian monarch ruling a kingdom of unimaginable wealth and power beyond the lands of Islam. His realm supposedly contained fountains of youth, rivers of gold, and an army so vast it could crush the caliphates between hammer and anvil. But here's the twist: no such king existed. The letters were likely crafted by a clever scribe in 12th century Europe, yet they ignited a firestorm of belief that would burn for centuries. What made this fabrication so potent was its timing. Europe was reeling from the Crusades' failures, desperate for hope that Christian allies lurked beyond Muslim borders. Prester John's letters promised exactly that: a savior king waiting to march westward, his troops clad in armor forged from mythical metals, his libraries stocked with lost Greek texts. The Vatican took the bait, dispatching envoys to find him. Explorers like Marco Polo later claimed to have traced whispers of his court in Mongolia or Ethiopia, each report adding new layers to the myth. Even when no kingdom materialized, the legend adapted, shifting locations like a mirage, always just beyond the next horizon. The real magic lay in how the story functioned. Like a secret society without members, it bound people through shared longing rather than oaths. Kings cited Prester John's alliance to boost morale before battles. Merchants forged trade routes chasing rumors of his cities. Monks copied the letters into chronicles as if they were diplomatic correspondence, blurring the line between fact and fiction so thoroughly that the lie became its own kind of truth. Prester John's greatest legacy wasn't the expeditions he inspired, but the blueprint he provided for power through narrative. Centuries later, when Portuguese explorers sought funding for voyages to Africa, they invoked his name to secure backers. The myth outlived empires because it answered a timeless human need, not for a hidden king, but for the idea that somewhere beyond the known world lay a place where ink and iron could still work miracles. And in that sense, perhaps the legend was real all along, not as a kingdom, but as proof that a well-told story can be the most durable weapon of all. Beneath the flickering torchlight of a 12th century banquet hall, a troubadour plucks the strings of his lute, his voice weaving a tale not of battles or saints, but of a knight's forbidden longing for his lord's wife. To the uninitiated, it's just entertainment, but to those versed in the coded language of Finema, refined love, every metaphor carries weight. The Lady's Ivory Tower isn't just a setting, it's the unbridgeable social gulf between them. The knight's wounds aren't from swords, but from her cold rejection. This wasn't mere poetry, it was a covert manifesto, turning courtly love into a shadow society with its own laws and ranks, all hidden in plain sight. The rules of this clandestine romance were as rigid as any knight's oath. A true amour had to be secret, adulterous, and crucially unfulfilled. Troubadours like Bernard de Ventadorn sang of lovesickness as a sacred torment, where the very impossibility of union became proof of devotion. In one lyric, a lover compares himself to a shipwrecked sailor, clinging to a mast, his lady's indifference the storm that both destroys and exalts him. These weren't just flowery metaphors, they were survival tactics. By framing desire as an abstract ideal rather than a physical act, poets and their noble patrons could critique feudal marriages, often political transactions, without outright defiance. Knights turned these ideals into performative rituals. The Coeur d'Amour, courts of love, allegedly presided over by figures like Elena of Aquitaine, judged cases of romantic conduct like a secular inquisition. One surviving decree rules that love cannot exist between spouses, a startling subversion of medieval norms. Winners of tournaments might dedicate victories to their chosen lady, wearing her scarf into battle like a sacred relic. But the most telling symbol was the chancelleur's handwritten songbooks, where lyrics were often accompanied by illustrations of lovers exchanging rings through barred windows, their bodies separated by stone but their gazes locked in silent complicity. The genius of this system lay in its plausible deniability. A lord hearing his wife praised in song could choose to interpret it as flattery rather than treason. The church, ever suspicious of passion, tolerated it because troubadours draped their verses in Marian imagery, comparing unavailable ladies to the Virgin Mary, thus sanctifying forbidden longing. Even the ironclad oaths of chivalry got entangled. A knight's vow to serve all ladies could mask devotion to one in particular, his sword literally and figuratively pledged to her defense. Yet for all its refinement, courtly love had teeth. When Marie de Champagne declared that true love must be kept secret, she wasn't just romanticizing, she was protecting lives. Affairs between lower-born knights and high-born ladies could mean execution if exposed. The famous Roman de la Rose manuscript includes a scene where the lover must pick his way through a thorny hedge, allegory for social barriers, to reach the rose his beloved, each scratch representing gossip, rival suitors, or the ever-present threat of scandal. The movement's legacy outlasted the Middle Ages. Dante's Divine Comedy transforms Beatrice from an unattainable Florentine girl into a celestial guide, proving how courtly love could bridge earthly and divine. Modern romance novels still echo the tropes of the suffering hero and the untouchable beloved. Even the concept of love letters traces back to these coded missives, where a broken seal might mean a broken life. What began as poetic gamesmanship became something far more revolutionary, a blueprint for emotional autonomy in a world where hearts were supposed to bow to crowns. The troubadours and their knightly accomplices proved that ink could be as subversive as any blade, and that sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't whispered in dungeons but sung in broad daylight. The story of the Magna Carta isn't one of bold declarations under open skies. It's a tale of hushed conversations in torchlit chambers, where the fate of nations balanced on the edge of a quill. When King John faced his rebellious barons at Runnymede in 1215, the document they pressed into his hands wasn't born from sudden enlightenment. It was the product of a shadow network, nobles whispering in monastery cloisters, clergymen drafting clauses by candlelight, and disgruntled knights passing coded messages under the pretense of hunting trips. This wasn't just negotiation, it was conspiracy inked onto parchment and backed by the implicit threat of drawn swords. Take the mysterious, unknown Charter, a precursor to the Magna Carta discovered centuries later in a French archive. This fragment, likely circulated among rebel leaders, contained explosive demands, limits on royal taxes, protections for widows, even the radical idea that the king wasn't above the law. Its existence proves the barons didn't arrive at Runnymede unprepared. They came armed with carefully crafted legal arguments, their language honed by canon lawyers who'd studied Roman civil codes. The church played both sides, with Archbishop Langton secretly advising the rebels while publicly mediating, a dual role that would cost him his position when the Pope learned the truth. But ink alone couldn't force a king's hand. The real leverage came from the barons' silent partners, the mercenary captains and castle garrisons who'd quietly switched allegiance. London's gates had already swung open to the rebels, its wealthy burghers betting against the crown. When John's own half-brother, the Earl of Salisbury, began withholding troops, the message was clear. This wasn't just a protest, but a coordinated coup disguised as legal reform. The Magna Carta's famous sealing wasn't a ceremony. It was a surrender extracted under duress, with armed barons forming a semicircle behind their scribes. The document itself bristles with covert meaning. Clause 61, the Security Clause, established a council of 25 barons empowered to seize royal castles if John reneged, essentially legalizing rebellion. Other passages referenced obscure feudal customs in ways that gave nobles loopholes to challenge the crown indefinitely. Most tellingly, multiple copies were made and dispatched to cathedrals across England, not for publicity, but so the terms couldn't be destroyed in a single raid. This was constitutional warfare, where every word was a landmine waiting to be triggered. John's swift betrayal, appealing to the Pope to annul the Charter, only proved how dangerous he found these shadow mechanisms. When the Pope's bull arrived declaring the Magna Carta null and void of all validity forever, it wasn't just a rejection of reform, but a strike against the very idea that power could be constrained by ink. The barons responded by inviting French Prince Louis to claim the throne, sparking a civil war that only ended when John's death allowed the charter to be reissued under his 9-year-old son. What makes the Magna Carta's survival so remarkable is its underground afterlife. For centuries, copies molded in cathedral archives, ignored by kings but preserved by monks who recognized their latent power. Then, in the 17th century, lawyers like Edward Coke resurrected its clauses to challenge the Stuart monarchs, reinterpreting medieval feudal law as universal rights. America's founding fathers would later cite it as precedent, enshrining its spirit in constitutions its drafters could never have imagined, the ultimate irony. A document born from backroom deals and temporary alliances became the foundation of open justice. Its creators weren't visionaries, but pragmatists who understood that real change often begins not with grand proclamations, but with secret meetings, coded language, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the pen must be backed by the sword. The Magna Carta reminds us that even our brightest legal landmarks cast long shadows, and that freedom's blueprint was often drafted in the dark. Walking through a medieval church, your eye might catch a chilling fresco on the wall, a grinning skeleton clasping hands with a king, a bishop, even a laughing child in an endless procession toward the grave. This was the Danse Macabre, the dance of death, and to the casual observer, it was just another morbid reminder of mortality in an age familiar with plague and war. But look closer. That skeletal figure tugging the emperor by his robe isn't merely a warning, it's a subversive manifesto painted in bone white and shadow. Artists of the late Middle Ages wielded their brushes like underground pamphleteers. By framing radical ideas within acceptable religious themes, they bypassed censors with a stroke of genius. The Danse Macabre's true power lay in its leveling effect. When death takes both the beggar and the baron with equal indifference, it quietly undermines the divine right of kings. A surviving 15th century mural in Paris's Holy Innocents Cemetery showed death playing chess with a knight, the pieces scattered, a not-so-subtle hint that skill and status meant nothing in the end. Parishioners who'd never dare question feudal hierarchy could absorb the message visually, internalizing it before they even realized what they'd seen. The medium itself became part of the rebellion. Woodcuts of the dance spread like viral images, cheap to produce and easy to distribute. Unlike lavish illuminated manuscripts locked in noble libraries, these prints circulated in taverns and markets. Over in Germany, artists like Hans Holbein the Younger later weaponized the theme in miniature etchings, smuggling them inside prayer books. One particularly audacious version showed death sawing down the tree of life while clergy clung to the branches, a visual jab at corruption that could be dismissed as just art if challenged. Clever creators added personalized twists for those in the know. In Lübeck's Marienkirche, a dance mural included a skeletal drummer with the face of a local tax collector, letting villagers laugh at their oppressor under the guise of piety. Swiss versions depicted death as a fiddler leading bankers mid-counting, their coins spilling uselessly. Even the materials whispered rebellion. Some artists mixed ground bone into their white paint, ensuring the skeletons quite literally contained the remains of the people they mocked. What made these images so dangerous was their ambiguity. Church authorities tolerated them as memento mori, reminders of life's brevity, but the undercurrent was undeniable. When Basel's dance frescoes showed popes and emperors stumbling blindly into graves while peasants walked upright, it wasn't just about death's inevitability, it was about dignity in the face of it. The dance became Europe's first meme, replicating and mutating across borders, its message adapting to local grievances while maintaining core dissent. The legacy of these grim dancers echoes in unexpected places. Modern political cartoons still use skeletons to critique power. The egalitarian spirit resurfaces in movements demanding justice. And perhaps most tellingly, the dance endures in festivals from Mexico's Day of the Dead to New Orleans jazz funerals, proof that the most potent rebellions aren't always shouted. Sometimes they're painted on church walls, waiting centuries for the world to decipher their steps. Beneath the towering legends of the Templars and the Rosicrucians, a shadowy tapestry of lesser-known orders wove their own threads into the fabric of medieval secrecy. Take the Order of the Dragon, founded in 1408 by Sigismund of Luxembourg. Their emblem, a dragon coiled around a cross, wasn't just for show. Initiation required drinking wine mixed with the blood of the inductee, a ritual blending iron's violence with ink's symbolism. While later romanticized as vampire hunters, their true purpose was far more political. A network of nobles bound by oath to defend Christianity from Ottoman expansion. Surviving charters reveal meticulous hierarchies, with members like Vlad the Impaler, yes, that Vlad using the dragon motif to seal documents, turning wax and parchment into weapons of intimidation. Then there's the Companions of the Olive Branch, a 15th century French brotherhood so obscure their records survive only in fragments. A single charred ledger found in a Provençal monastery lists members by coded symbols, a falcon for knights, a quill for scholars, alongside cryptic notes about harvest feasts that likely masked political meetings. Their ceremonial daggers, now gathering dust in a Lyon museum, bear inscriptions in a cipher that still defies translation. Unlike the Templars' grand preceptories, these groups met in vineyards or back rooms of guild halls, their influence radiating through whispers rather than decrees. The Brotherhood of the Black Swan, active in Burgundy, took secrecy to poetic extremes. Their initiation involved reciting verses while balancing on one foot, a test of both memory and physical control. Surviving membership rolls hidden inside hollowed-out hymnals show members ranging from jewelers to judges, proof that secrecy wasn't just for warriors or mystics. Even their Black Swan emblem played a double game. To outsiders, it symbolized rare beauty. To initiates, it represented the group's watchfulness, swans being fiercely territorial. What makes these forgotten orders so fascinating isn't their size, but their adaptability. The Order of the Crescent in Anjou used stained glass workshops as fronts, crafting windows where the placement of certain colors signaled meeting times. The Knights of the Horn, a German hunting society, embedded coded messages in the carvings on their drinking horns. Rotate the vessel just so, and hidden runes align. These weren't just clubs with fancy rituals, they were living proof that in an age of upheaval, even minor players understood the power of symbols. A dagger left on a rival's pillow could send a clearer message than an army at the gates, and a well-placed seal on a contract could secure alliances no public oath would dare acknowledge. Their legacies linger in unexpected places. The dragon motif resurfaces in Transylvanian folk art, the olive branch in Renaissance peace treaties. Even the swan appears in modern fraternal logos, stripped of its original meaning but still echoing that old Burgundian vigilance. These groups remind us that history's grand narratives are built on countless hidden threads, some silken, some frayed, but all vital to the weave. The next time you see an odd crest in a medieval manuscript or a strangely decorated weapon in a museum case, look closer. You might be staring at the last whisper of a society that mastered the art of being forgotten until now. The Renaissance didn't just rediscover classical art and science, it resurrected an entire underground tradition of hidden knowledge. When scholars like Pico della Mirandola pored over dusty manuscripts in Florentine libraries, they weren't just reading Plato and Aristotle. Between the lines of those rediscovered texts, they found echoes of something older: symbols, ciphers, and ideas that traced back to the secret societies of the Dark Ages. The Alchemists' rose cross resurfaced in the artwork of Botticelli. The Templars' banking techniques inspired Medici accountants. Even the architectural secrets of Gothic masons found new life in Brunelleschi's dome, its self-supporting design a direct descendant of techniques guarded for centuries in lodge meetings. What made this revival so explosive was its timing. The printing press, that revolutionary machine of iron and ink, became the perfect vehicle for spreading ideas that had once required whispered initiation. Manuscripts that would have gotten a monk burned in 1200 were now mass-produced as philosophical treatises. The Corpus Hermeticum, a collection of ancient mystical texts preserved by medieval Arab scholars, rolled off European presses in 1463, convincing thinkers like Marsilio Ficino they'd uncovered a lost wisdom tradition older than Christianity itself. Overnight, the esoteric became academic, and the clandestine turned mainstream, at least on the surface. But old habits die hard. The same humanists who championed open inquiry also formed discreet circles where riskier ideas could circulate. Lorenzo de' Medici's Platonic Academy might have hosted public lectures, but its inner circle practiced rituals inspired by Eleusinian mysteries. Cryptographer Leon Battista Alberti didn't just invent polyalphabetic ciphers for fun. They were tools for a new kind of secret society, one where power flowed through intellectual networks rather than sword strokes. Even Michelangelo left clues, embedding Kabbalistic numerology in the Sistine Chapel's dimensions and hiding heretical anatomy in his Last Judgment. The real turning point came when these Renaissance adaptations crossed paths with political ambition. Elizabeth I's spymaster Francis Walsingham didn't just rely on medieval ciphers, he industrialized them, creating Europe's first modern intelligence apparatus by merging Templar-inspired spycraft with the printing press's reach. Over in Prague, Emperor Rudolf II turned his castle into a nexus for alchemists and Kabbalists, not because he believed in magic, but because he understood that controlling hidden knowledge meant controlling the future. By the time the Enlightenment dawned, the blueprint was set. Freemasons codified medieval stonemason symbols into a system of moral philosophy. The Illuminati borrowed the Rosicrucians' playbook to infiltrate universities and courts. Even the American Revolution pulsed with these old currents. Benjamin Franklin's Junto Society operated like a scholarly version of a knightly order, while Thomas Jefferson's library contained enough hermetic texts to make a medieval heretic blush. The ultimate irony, our digital age with its encrypted messages and shadowy hacker collectives, is just the latest chapter in this ancient dance between concealment and revelation. The Dark Ages never ended, they just upgraded their tools. Those medieval scribes hiding forbidden knowledge in Bible margins would instantly recognize our firewalls and VPNs as spiritual descendants of their own desperate ingenuity. The parchment changed, the swords rusted, but the essential truth remains. Civilization doesn't just advance in the light. Sometimes it needs the shadows to grow. The whispers of medieval secret societies didn't fade when the last Gothic cathedral was built or the final Crusader stronghold fell. Instead, they slithered into the marrow of history, shaping the modern world in ways we're only beginning to recognize. Think about it: every time you type a password, you're using a digital descendant of the Templars' cipher wheels. When journalists bury sensitive information in harmless-looking articles, they're employing the same techniques monks used to smuggle heresy inside prayer books. Even the concept of whistleblowing traces back to those defiant Cathars who memorized forbidden gospels, ready to recite them even as the flames licked at their feet. What these shadow networks understood, and what we often forget, is that secrecy isn't just about hiding, it's about preservation. The alchemists who encoded their formulas in poetry weren't merely being cryptic, they were ensuring their knowledge could survive persecution. The guilds that guarded their techniques with blood oaths weren't just protecting prophets, they were maintaining standards in a world where quality control didn't exist. And the nuns who stashed radical manuscripts beneath their choir stalls, they were proving that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply remembering what others want erased. Today, we face our own version of their struggles. Algorithms parse our words like medieval inquisitors scanning for heresy. Misinformation spreads faster than plague rumors in a 14th century marketplace. Yet the tools to fight back remain startlingly familiar. Encryption is our palimpsest, overwriting sensitive data with layers of noise. Decentralized networks echo the underground trade routes that kept forbidden ideas alive. Even blockchain technology with its tamper-proof ledgers owes a spiritual debt to those Templar bankers who first understood that trust could be engineered through transparency. The real lesson of these hidden histories isn't about conspiracy. It's about resilience. Every time a Viking rune master carved symbols only his kin could read, or a Jewish Kabbalist embedded cosmic truths in scripture's margins, they were making a wager that no matter how dark the age, light finds a way to linger. Their ink-stained fingers pass torches we're still carrying, whether we realize it or not. So the next time you see a corporate logo with a rose cross motif, or hear politicians speak of shadow cabinets, remember, you're not just observing history. You're living its echo. The Dark Ages never really ended. They just traded parchment for pixels and swords for subpoenas. The game remains the same. Only the board has changed. If this journey through the shadows has sparked your curiosity, let's keep the conversation alive. Drop a comment below. What medieval mystery should we decode next? The votes of long-dead knights, the unsolved ciphers of rogue alchemists, or perhaps the real identity of Prester John? Whatever you choose, one thing's certain: history's secrets are still out there, waiting for those brave enough to seek them. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me as we keep pulling threads from the tapestry of the past. Who knows what patterns we'll find when we weave them into the present?